Welcome to this lecture on the history of sociology. In this lecture, I would like to introduce you to the around 150 years of professional history our discipline has gone through, in mainly the United States and Europe, with Europe being rather dominant in the first half of the 20th century and the United States in the second half. Sociology is obviously more than just sociology in these two areas of the world. And therefore, if you want to dig deeper into the sociology of your own country of origin, take a look at the optional reading, which is a book title series here about the sociology in Latin American countries, also in Oceania, also on Russia, Eastern Europe. This is a growing series, so it is likely that your own country of origin may be covered in the future. So the reason for this lecture is that sociology as the discipline of society, if you want, depends itself on the historical background conditions that contribute and have contributed to its emergence and evolution over time. Therefore, it makes sense to take a little bit of a look into these historical conditions. So how can one actually do this history of sociology? Or this is even a subdiscipline within sociology, the sociology of sociology, that is making our self-research subject, if you want. Well, in the early days of sociology, it was mainly sociologists or other social scientists writing about themselves and their disciplines, usually upon retirement, when they looked back on a rich life in the profession. And here are just one of the examples. I think for economics, then Joseph Schumpeter, 1,000-page kind of volume here is the most famous of these early accounts. Within sociology, I would say there's no one really classical account of that status. I listed here Harry Barnes' Introduction to the History of Sociology as one of these early examples. These examples are obviously subjective a little bit because they are written by participants of the fields themselves. Since the 1970s, this 60s, sorry, this discipline professionalized a little bit more, with even professional journals emerging. Here, the Journal of the History of the Behavioral Sciences, for instance, or for our discipline as well, the Journal of the History of Sociology, now History of Sociology. So there are, let's say, dedicated social scientists in this subfield, history of the social sciences. It is largest for economics. This is also the largest discipline. And it is really a subfield, I would say, within our own profession. It is nothing I would recommend to specialize in for a sociology career. It is more considered as a kind of hobby for some, at least. A third kind of approach in, let's say, the history of the social sciences is undertaken by professional historians. And in the German context, there is a school called Begriffsgeschichte, founded by Koselleck in Bielefeld, which translates as the history of concepts. And within the school, many studies have also been undertaken about the preconditions for modern social science to emerge. So if you're interested in this kind of topic, I can really recommend works, for instance, by Ian Hacking about the history of probability, and or also histories of the emergence of modern statistics, which I will cite in a little bit. And these historians have also published, for instance, edited volumes or histories of the modern social sciences, which I can really recommend as probably the most in-depth treatment of the history of our discipline. When modern sociologists work on the profession of sociology, they do so also through the lens of the sociology of professions. This is a sociology that goes back to probably Max Weber and his concept of social status that organizes, for instance, these professional groups, which are groups that are basically excluding others from their membership, forming an internally coherent kind of arrangement. They are introducing rules of who is allowed to enter, how to basically make people exit this group, how to, for instance, to stratify the internal hierarchies, and so on and so on. And sociologists of professions also look at academic disciplines, including sociology, through this lens. Another way of doing sociology of sociology is a discipline called bibliometrics. That is a quantitative social science based on working on publication data and citation data in the discipline. Yeah, so through citations of works, it is possible to construct networks, social networks of different schools in sociology. And bibliometrics also benefits a lot from existing databases such as Web of Science, Google Scholar, as you all know, that standardize more and more publications and citations. Sociology of science is also a subdiscipline in the, let's say, sociology of technology more generally, where, let's say, more ethnographically minded sociologists really spend time among sociologists, or let's say scientists, more in laboratories and do participant observation and in a way do a bottom-up approach of how science really worked. You might have heard of Bruno Latour's recent death. He was one of the founders of the subdiscipline sociology of science. He spent, I think, about a year in a laboratory of the hard sciences and wrote a book about this. To make sense of the history of a discipline, including sociology, one can take, let's say, different views. And a traditional view of the natural course of a science that follows Hegel and other 19th century thinkers in social thought is a teleological view of science, where teleological refers to the Greek word telos, goal, that is, science has a goal, it is directed towards the growth of ever more accumulative knowledge. This view of science, including social science, has been predominant until the later 19th century, when the so-called paradigm view proposed by the physicist Thomas Kuhn let's say, raised certain doubts about the validity of this accumulative knowledge teleological view. According to Kuhn, science rather works within certain paradigms in which, let's say, fundamental assumptions are not further questioned in order to make science work. And every once in a while, there is an accumulation of doubt about these fundamental assumptions in forming a paradigm. Let's say there are irregularities in these assumptions that come to the fore, which then, according to Kuhn, leads to a shift or even a revolution in paradigm. That is, the progress in science is not given. Within a paradigm, progress can be made, but let's say revolutions rather change the overall language in which the scientific enterprise works, without it necessarily being an objectively measurable progress. There's some debate about whether Kuhn's ideas are commensurable with the idea of scientific progress. There's also some debate about whether what is said within one paradigm is translatable into another paradigm. But overall, this paradigm view of the evolution of science has really raised considerable doubts about this accumulative knowledge view being at least empirically adequate, such that the evolution of science, social science, Thomas Kuhn mainly used physics as an example, is more of a conversation with changing topics under different paradigms than an accumulation of more and more knowledge. So these are two broad ideas of how one can, let's say, assume the history of a science to evolve. A second distinction that is often used in the sociology of science is that between an externalism and internalism regarding the factors that determine a scientific progress or scientific definitions in truth in particular, but also scientific output. An externalist with regard to science would say that factors external to science, such as the general society, the economic conditions, determine what kind of science is done. So if you're a Marxist, then probably you hold this view, and Karl Marx himself is cited with basically saying that the political economy of one's time, so the group of theories that people hold about the economy at a given time, depends on the state of the economy, such that Marx, for instance, credits Adam Smith for discovering that labor is an important factor in generating growth. But he also points to the fact that Adam Smith was not able to, let's see, the more revolutionary theories and contradictions in capitalism just because he lived too early to see this happening in the 18th century. An internalist view about what determines scientific developments would be to say, for instance, that the professional logics of a field, the competition for academic positions, for instance, determines what kind of topics are chosen, perhaps even how truth is defined. You see already that externalists and internalists can come in at least two different versions. There is a so-called strong program in the sociology of science that says that there is a strong determinism of everything that's going on in science, including truth. That is, these external or internal factors really determine even what objectivity means, what truth means, etc. So scientific production is just another production of knowledge as we know it in society with no special status. This is the strong, really strong program in the sociology of scientific knowledge. A weaker position would be to say that these external or internal factors have an influence, obviously, on what scientists choose as topics, for instance, their style of argument, their epistemological styles and use of methods, etc. An early 19th century sociologist, for instance, wouldn't have been able to use modern survey data, etc. But that beyond these influences, there is still, in a way, an autonomy of scientific notions. All right, so these are different ways of conceptualizing sociological thinking about science and the social sciences in particular. Let's turn now to where modern social science comes from. And I say modern because